Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Donald Trump doubles down on his push to claim Greenland, threatening Europe with more tariffs. The Syrian Defense Ministry has announced a 4-day ceasefire after a new agreement with Kurdish force. Brooklyn Beckham accuses his parents of trying to sabotage his marriage and says he won't reconcile with them. Now, US President Donald Trump is doubling down on his push to acquire Greenland, telling reporters ahead of the Davos summit, "We have to have it," arguing Europe cannot protect the Arctic island. European leaders are pushing back, with Brussels weighing retaliatory trade measures as Trump threatens tariffs if a deal is not reached. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke at Davos today about the trade partnership agreement, the EU and another signed agreement. Here's what she had to say.
This agreement sends a powerful message to the world that we are choosing fair trade over tariffs, partnership over isolation, sustainability over exploitation, and that we are serious about de-risking our economies and diversifying our supply chains.
For more on this, I'm joined by David Hynek, Director of the UK Trade Policy Project. David, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I just want to begin with the fact it's been a really busy day. So world leaders have been descending on Davos. We just heard there from the European Commission President on Europe choosing free trade over tariffs. Is the EU able to negotiate with President Donald Trump on tariff threats without facing massive blowback?
Well, that is the question that EU leaders are wrestling with really constantly since Saturday, when this latest threat came in, is how much to push back on President Trump's threat of tariffs, how much to seek their own pathway of new trade agreements, and how much to just kind of accept what the US is trying to do or push back in private. Tomorrow is a key day because there will be meetings with President Trump in Davos, so we will see what comes out of that. But at this stage, there isn't the appetite across the EU for very strong retaliatory measures, maybe for some, but the EU is very anxious to avoid a trade war. So at this stage, I'm thinking that they are going to give some time for negotiations and discussions to bear fruit before they reach for those such measures.
And I'm sure they're very anxious about meeting Donald Trump tomorrow and hearing his speech in Davos. But David, we also heard from Scott Bessent, and he's urging European nations to sit back and relax over Trump's Greenland tariff threats. What do you make of this advice from the US Treasury Secretary? And basically, how is it going down with the Europeans?
Well, I think the US Treasury Secretary is speaking as much to US markets as he is to EU leaders, because he doesn't want to see markets spooked by the potential of a trade war. There's also a message in here, I think, that European leaders are well aware of, that Trump's threats don't always become actual actions. If we recall, it's a couple of weeks ago now that Trump threatened 25% tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran, and those have not yet come to pass. So that's another reason why time is being taken over this. EU leaders are, let's say, not particularly looking forward, I think, to meeting with Trump, but they are doing their best to see if they can find a resolution that doesn't involve giving Trump what he wants, so that they can basically diffuse this whole issue.
And it's really interesting you spoke about the US markets because they did open lower today, obviously closed yesterday for Martin Luther King Day, but definitely rattled by this threat over Greenland. But amidst the ongoing geopolitical shocks, can Europe unite over Trump's comments on the bloc? Just today, the US president blasted the UK over the Chagos Islands, published text messages from the French President Emmanuel Macron and the NATO Secretary General. Let's be honest, Trump has gone for Europe since he came back into office, and sometimes Europe appear extremely divided.
I think at a basic level, Europe is actually quite united, and there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes between the offices of the leaders to try to keep that unity. We've seen it over Ukraine. We are seeing it over Trump, but that only goes so far. It only goes as far as getting the basic response, which is to say we are not giving up on Greenland. We do not believe it is for sale. In terms of taking retaliatory actions, there is not unity. There's talk sometimes of the EU deploying what's called as bazooka, the anti-coercion instrument. There is not sufficient unity for that to happen. In some ways, that may actually work out for the best, because it does take the EU in particular some time to decide what it's going to do. And President Trump may just get a little bit bored waiting and actually not end up doing what he threatened to do. So, yeah, Europe does struggle with unity, but on this particular case, with regard to Greenland, there is very little opposition to standing up against Trump.
Yeah, but opposition on how to retaliate. And I think that's one of the things that people are watching and looking at right now, David. But we've been talking about the threats that Donald Trump has made over Greenland, this 10% tariff. And you said, look, the EU are sitting back. They're hoping Trump might forget about it. But do you think Donald Trump is actually up for diplomacy at the moment? Because he's reiterated wanting to take Greenland one way or another since he started this conversation just a few weeks ago.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think President Trump is ever really up for diplomacy. I think that's an activity that the Europeans and others try to do, and to reach different people in Washington who may be able to influence. I think this will ultimately come down, as much with Trump does, to the domestic argument. There are midterm elections coming up. He's not going to want to cause any more price increases in the US. There's a lot of concern in US political circles about what Trump is up to, and what I think Europe will be hoping for is that enough of that persuades the president to pause, at least for a while, and then he may forget about it, lose interest, think about other things that he is focused on, and that way the Greenland issue slightly goes away. This for Europe is very much about playing for time, particularly as they really don't want to get into a trade war, which will cost the EU economically and mean that EU consumers will face higher prices, which they don't want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the problems. It has to tread carefully because of how it could affect their economies in Europe. That's a good point. But what do you make of Donald Trump publishing Emmanuel Macron's text messages to him and the NATO secretary's text messages? And we've seen lots of AI-generated images of Trump arriving on Greenland with an American flag. Is this just not adding more fuel to the fire?
Well, I think by this point, everybody is used to President Trump, and I think that people know that their messages may get leaked. I don't think there's anything in what Macron said to Trump that is actually particularly surprising or offensive. It actually does show the president of France pushing back against Trump's plans with regard to Greenland and trying to organise around it. So I think they're just trying to deal with Trump going into full. I mean, this is Trump going into almost the king mode that a lot of people in the US accuse him of wanting to be, and Europe is just trying to deal with it as best they can, as other countries have dealt with before. And this comes round potentially to all countries. So nobody is really fully exempt from Trump. At the moment, it's European countries, but it could be someone else tomorrow. This is the way that Trump operates. It is all about the show. It's all about him seeing whether he can achieve things. If he doesn't, he does sometimes move on. And it's for those reasons we think, okay, it's not yet a crisis. It could become one.
And I just want to ask you one other question just about Ursula von der Leyen's speech, because I thought it was quite interesting. She was speaking in Davos, and she also said that basically the EU is on the cusp of a historic free trade agreement with India. And I found that really interesting because it does show the EU has trading options. What more do we know about this? Because I do know von der Leyen is due in India.
Ursula von der Leyen is due to be in India next week it's a public holiday. She will be a guest of honour of the Indian Prime Minister Modi. They are hoping to sign a trade agreement there and then. It's not the most ambitious of trade agreements, but it does potentially reduce tariffs on in India for European goods and vice versa in Europe, and it potentially diversifies European trade, and that's absolutely what the EU is looking for. One of the main ways the EU is trying to respond to Trump is diversifying away from the US and dependence there, while also being cautious of China. A deal with India coming on top of a deal with South America, that would show that the EU was serious about diversification.
Brilliant to have you on the show and all your analysis. David, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. For more on this, I'm now joined by Sol Montes Bradley, Vice President of Communications at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Sol, as usual, brilliant to have you on the show. I just want to talk to you a little bit about Davos, because we were talking about it earlier, and obviously all the big leaders are in Davos, but it's quite interesting. Gavin Newsom, of course, the Democratic governor of California, had a message for the Europeans, and he said, stop being pathetic and have a backbone on Greenland. Is he right? Is it time for Europe to stand tall against President Donald Trump?
Good afternoon, Leigh-Ann. Pleasure to be here again. It's funny that you lead with Gavin Newsom, a lame duck governor of California, who's himself into a lot of trouble with corruption tied to billions that have disappeared from assistance to the homeless, and a state that is run up a debt that brings it to the brink of bankruptcy. He's desperately trying to get some attention, and this is one way of doing it. This is the same people that not too long ago were going after General Flynn for violating the Logan Act, debt law, from the 1700s.
So, Sol, I just want to go back.
It's not his job to conduct foreign policy.
Okay, so you say Gavin Newsom is a lame duck and basically the Europeans shouldn't listen to him. Okay, let's move on.
Yes.
Okay, no problem at all. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron has said the endless accumulation of new tariffs from the US is fundamentally unacceptable. So we're also hearing a similar tone coming from Emmanuel Macron. And I think a lot of people right now, Sol, in Europe are asking, and conversations in Davos is, why is the US president going after his allies who have supported the US for so many years? Russia must just be sitting back watching this with popcorn.
Maybe they are, but those allies have supported the U.S. with humongous tariffs on U.S. products and subsidies on European products, and have been waging an economic war in the U.S. for decades. Mm-hmm. From aircraft to cars to cheese, Europe has been consistently anything but a free trader. Mm-hmm. Even now, we hear that we're going to have a free trade agreement with India, which means a reduction of import duties, not their elimination. Maybe they have to reset their minds and understand that free trade means free trade. And you cannot tariff the heck out of American products and then cry uncle when you get a 10%.
And so Donald Trump has been busy today. He's been posting a lot of things on Truth Social. We've had screenshots of messages with Emmanuel Macron and NATO's chief Mark Rutte, as well as these AI-generated images of himself placing an American flag on Greenland. What's Donald Trump up to? Is he not just making things worse the more and more he goes on Truth Social?
Well, actually, he has made them a lot better. A year and a half ago, nobody was talking about Greenland, while China and Russia were making their own move in the Arctic. And right now, we have Rutte ready to defend Greenland. We have the Prime Minister of Denmark speaking that NATO needs to take a bigger role in Greenland. Already the ground has shifted for the better. This is not going to end up with a US invasion. This is going to end up with Europe assuming the responsibilities, keeping the Arctic safe.
So do you think that what Donald Trump is doing is absolutely correct, and he's basically negotiating and he's trying to wake up Europe, he's trying to wake up NATO and said, this is an important place, you need to protect it and you haven't been doing enough?
Absolutely. And I think that to the degree that Europe is waking up to the importance of Greenland, he has already succeeded.
Mm. And President Donald Trump, of course, he arrives in Davos tomorrow, and I'm sure many leaders are anxiously awaiting his arrival, especially the European ones that have been speaking today. What can we expect from the US president when he is in Davos tomorrow?
I believe we should expect a more articulate definition of the problem and a more clear explanation of what he needs from Europe. But definitely, we're also going to hear that the old way of doing things is dead, is gone, and for at least the next 3 years is not coming back.
And so the Lithuanian president has also actually been speaking at Davos. And I just wanted to get your opinion a little bit on NATO as an organization and as an alliance, because a lot of people are worried about the future of NATO. Do you think the future of NATO is at stake right now with Donald Trump's claims that he wants to gain full control of Greenland? Because we know Greenland is under NATO, it's part of Denmark. We are all traditional allies with the US. Is there real concern that we could see this big strategic partnership crack up?
Well, the opposite is what I see. NATO abandoned Greenland a long time ago to its fate. NATO has been underfunded by European countries for decades. The US has been having to carry the weight of NATO on its shoulders, while European countries figured they could play welfare state with funds that they would otherwise have had to dedicate to their own defense. Trump is waking it up. NATO is the most important alliance that we have, and it needs to be up to par. European countries have to do their share. Can you imagine what would happen if the US withdrew its troops from Europe? I guarantee you a long-lasting recession. The contributions of the United States to the defense of Europe and to the economies where we keep our bases for the defense of Europe is huge. And Europe has been perfectly content to having somebody else pay for it. And this president in particular will have none of it.
Sol Montes Bradley, very good points there. Someone speaking to me on the show yesterday said, I think Europe's finally waking up and smelling the coffee, pretty similar to what you've just said to me. Sol Montes Bradley is...
I didn't see it, but I agree, indeed.
Watch it next time. Sol Montes Bradley, as always, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure. Now, the Syrian Defense Ministry has announced a 4-day ceasefire after a new agreement with Kurdish forces. It comes after around 1,500 ISIS fighters have escaped from Shadideh prison, as both sides do trade blame. Meanwhile, US envoy Tom Barrack has said the US has no interest in long-term military presence For more on this, I'm joined by Wolf Christian Paes, Associate Fellow at the International Institute of Strategic Studies. Thank you so much, Wolf Christian, for joining me. So we've just had some news in the last half an hour or so that another 4-day ceasefire has been brokered. The Syrian Defense Ministry announces 4-day ceasefire after new accord with Kurdish forces. What more do we know about this?
Well, I mean, it's an emerging situation, so it's hard to see where this is leading. This is not the first ceasefire. This is not the first time that a resolution to this conflict was announced. But we have to see, how long this is holding. I mean, the core problem at the end of the day is a power struggle between the Kurdish-dominated SDF, the Syrian Defense Forces, and Damascus, the government in Damascus under Ahmed al-Shara. And the question is, how will this play out in the longer run? There have been negotiations ever since the revolution of December 2024 about integrating the Kurdish-dominated forces into the new Syrian Arab army. But so far, very little of this has happened. And as a result of that, we're seeing these conflicts about who's controlling territory in the northeast of the country.
And it's really interesting because President Ahmed al-Shara discussed the Kurdish issue with President Donald Trump on Monday. Does Washington back Damascus's position? Because for years, the US backed the SDF, so it's a difficult situation.
It is indeed. It's a difficult situation for the SDF and for the Kurdish forces in Syria in general. Under the Assad regime, the Kurds basically had a large degree of autonomy in the north and received a fair bit of support from the United States, but also from European nations to fight ISIS in particular. And as a result of that, they didn't really fight the Assad regime so much, right? Because they already had the autonomy that they wanted. And their main sort of regional rival was not Assad, but rather Turkey. And so basically, now the tables have turned. Now Ahmed al-Shara has the support of both Turkey and, it seems, of the White House. And as a result of that, the SDF is losing ground politically in the international arena.
And the Kurdish-led SDF say they have withdrawn from northeast Syria's Al-Hol camp, which holds thousands of ISIS extremists. The Syrian army has accused them of abandoning the site. What more do we know? And I think there's great concern about ISIS fighters now being released back into Syria and out of the prisons.
Indeed, there is. The issue of the ISIS fighters in these camps has been unresolved for many, many years, right? It's both fighters, but also their family members, including women and children. In a sense, the SDF is playing this as a political card. I don't think either the government in Damascus and certainly not the SDF has any interest of ISIS fighters sort of being released in this way into the general population. But the SDF has always been saying, well, we're sort of safeguarding Syria against ISIS. And now that we're losing this territory against our wishes to the government in Damascus, Damascus is not doing enough to keep them to keep them under control. Now, the bigger challenge here is, of course, that for more than a decade now, nobody has really figured out what to do with these people who've been sitting in limbo for a very long time. How many of the fighters have really left the camp? Nobody knows at this stage, right? It's really early days. But I personally don't think that Damascus has any more interest in seeing ISIS fighters running freely in Syria than the SDF does.
And I want to bring you a breaking news line. Syria Kurdish force says committed to ceasefire deal with the government. So that seems pretty positive coming from them. We've discussed some of the key challenges at the moment. Does it appear that de-escalation is on the horizon?
de-escalation is certainly welcome. What we need to keep in mind is that this is not the first such announcement, right? We had a big announcement already last year in May that the Kurdish forces would be integrated into the government forces. Nothing has happened. We've heard other statements about sort of more rights for the Kurdish population in Syria. All of which I'm sure is very welcome. The point is implementation here, right? So far, we've seen comparatively little implementation. And the unresolved question at the end of the day is what kind of state the new Syria is going to be. Is it going to be a centralist state where all the power is with the central government in Damascus? Or is it some form of a federal state where groups such as the Kurds in the north, but also other minorities, might have certain political rights within their regions? And that's a bigger question at stake. Is unresolved. Damascus wants a centralist state. The minorities want more minority rights and political, sort of a federal system. And the big question here is that it's not just a political question, but also a military question, because the Kurds, but also other groups, have their own militias, which are under arms. And this is why we see clashes like we've seen in Aleppo in the northeast in the last couple of days.
Wolf Christian Paes, it's been so good to have you on. Thank you. Sorry, Wolf Christian. I did think I said that wrong, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Now, Australia's New South Wales has been hit by 4 shark attacks in less than 48 hours. A 39-year-old man was wounded from a shark bite today following 3 other attacks near Sydney. Chris Gilbert has the story.
It's the peak season, but Sydney's beaches are closed. Swimming is prohibited after a shark bit a man in his 30s on Tuesday, following an attack on a man in his 20s the day before. Emergency services were called to a Manly beach following reports a surfer had been bitten by a shark. He was treated for serious leg injuries and taken to hospital in a critical condition. That followed a 10-year-old boy escaping harm after a shark took a chunk of his surfboard. On Sunday, a boy was left in a critical condition after being bitten at a harbour beach. Locals are keen to avoid the water.
Probably not going to be surfing for a while. I don't think anybody will. It's a bit of a shock. The harbour, DY again, and then Manly. It's quite scary, you know. So it's basically that brackish water brings in the big ones. So yeah, I'll be staying out of the water for a while.
And people have gone and surfed before when beaches are closed. It hasn't normally put people off, but I think the recent spate of incidents has made people a lot more aware.
In Queensland, the animal attacks continued. Police are investigating the death of a Canadian tourist after her body was found on Kagadi or Fraser Island, surrounded by a small pack of dingoes. Her body was found an hour after she had embarked on a morning swim.
People that were on the island that were travelling down the beach noticed the group of dingoes, stopped very quickly and obviously scared those dingoes away and uncovered the young lady's body. It's obviously a very confronting thing to see on the beach, which is a place that families will attend en masse at this time of year.
Following the spate of attacks, authorities are warning people to stay careful around the water. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Spain has declared 3 days of national mourning after at least 40 people were killed in a high-speed train crash in southern Spain. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez visited the crash site and promised a full investigation into why the trains collided. Authorities say more than 120 passengers were injured. A massive pile-up involving over 100 vehicles has shut down the I-96 highway in the U.S. state of Michigan. State police say multiple people were injured, but thankfully no fatalities have been reported. One driver said he could barely see the cars ahead while driving slowly in snowy conditions before that crash happened. The US Justice Department is investigating protesters who disrupted a Sunday service at a Minnesota church, chanting against ICE and demanding justice for Renee Good, a woman killed by an ICE agent earlier this month. Officials say the demonstrators demonstrated a house of worship and could face federal charges. Anti-ICE protests have intensified across Minneapolis, with thousands arrested and soldiers on standby amidst rising tensions over immigration enforcement. And Italian fashion icon Valentino has died at the age of 93, famous for his signature Valentino Red. His designs dress stars from Elizabeth Taylor to Gwyneth Paltrow. He co-founded the Valentino fashion house back in 1960. Now, Brooklyn Paltz Beckham has broken his silence on reports of a family feud, saying he does not want to reconcile with his parents. In Instagram posts, he accused his mum and dad of trying to sabotage his marriage and controlling him for years. He said, speaking out, I was his only option after repeated attacks in the press. The Beckhams have not publicly responded. For more on this, I'm joined from London by our showbiz reporter, Stephanie Tetchy. Stephanie, as always, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Leigh-Ann.
One word, wow. What prompted Brooklyn to go so nuclear on Instagram?
It can only be that enough was enough for Brooklyn Beckham. Leigh-Ann, as all us showbiz journalists have been doing over the past few weeks, we've been looking at his social media, looking at Nicola's social media, and they have been trolled endlessly about the fallout with the Beckham family, with Sir David Beckham and Victoria Beckham. I don't think Brooklyn Beckham has had any peace over the past few weeks, past few months, even as he's tried to do new things. People keep on saying, you need to make up with your mum, you need to make up with your dad. And it's been the same thing for Nicola. So I think it's been a lot of pressure for them as a they've been married for 3 years, but it's been a lot of pressure for the couple. I have to say that a lot of news outlets have been publishing about 4, 5, 6 stories a day about this fallout with the Beckhams. And I think it was Brooklyn's chance to really set the record straight. As we know, Leigh-Ann, there's always 2 sides to a story and then the truth. At the moment, we haven't heard David and Victoria's Beckham's side of the story. Currently, David is in Davos for the World Economic Forum, where a lot of journalists have been trying to get out of him what he's thought about his son's rant online. He hasn't responded, but he did do a news interview where he addressed that children do make mistakes on social media. So we do think he is kind of alluding to what happened last night, which is being described as shocking, explosive, and very unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephanie. And I think that people are divided into 2 camps at the moment, aren't they? Because like you said, there's 2 sides of a story and there's the truth. And people are either Team Brooklyn or Team Beckham. And what I find really interesting at the moment is no matter what team you're on, we have to remember that there's a massive family brand here, the Beckham brand. How damaging could this be for them?
I think this has really tarnished their brand, especially as Sir David Beckham has just been knighted not too long ago. You know, he fought hard for that knighthood. And also he's always tried to uphold this image of being a family man, a family unit, which has been really strong, both him and Victoria. You know what? This is not a family who has not been plagued by controversy. They have been, but they've always managed to rise above it as a unit. And with Brooklyn's comments, he's just literally thrown this whole family image that we've seen of them as being fake. and it's cost him his mental health. He's basically described his parents as fame hungry. So the problem is, once you give birth to such comments in the public, people are always going to remember that now. And, you know, I do feel sorry for his siblings, his other 3 siblings who have stuck by his parents, because now people are going to be thinking, are we going to get those same kind of, same kind of thoughts from them as they're older? Because, you know, Brooklyn says, I have been controlled by my parents my whole entire life, you know. So that is a pretty strong statement. He said that their love was only based on what they posted online, which really sounds very unhealthy and toxic. So now going forward, it will be very hard for the Beckham family to portray themselves as this strong unit.
And Stephanie, it's really interesting because you're just outlining what Brooklyn said online there, but Victoria and David Beckham's fans are criticising Brooklyn and his careers after his online attack on his family. People are saying he's just a privileged Nepo baby. Let's be honest, Brooklyn Beckham wouldn't be where he is if it wasn't for his parents' money and their links and their status.
You know what, Leigh-Ann, the comments have been so cruel, and you know what, I think people have not held back because they're saying, could you even married Nicola if you wasn't a Beckham? Like, who are you without that Beckham name? But the problem is with these Nepo babies, and I've seen it all the time, is like, yes, they've lived a life of privilege, but also they've been born into a life that they didn't ask to be born into. And with most famous children, they have a very hard time living up to their parents' expectations. And when they try to establish themselves as their own individual, all people will forever do is compare them to their famous parents. So that takes a hit mentally for a lot of these so-called Nepo babies. And even when they do try to move forward, they're always going to be plagued by such criticism. So when Brooklyn Beckham has said that he's now found peace, I totally understand that, because it's like he now wants to build this new chapter with Nicola minus his Beckham brand and the famous name he's had. And, you know, again, in the online rant, he said that my parents even tried to make me sell the rights to my name. It goes to show it's beyond family. It's about business as well for half of these Nepo babies.
I did laugh there when you did say, I've been reading all the comments online, Stephanie, and I've been looking at all the memes. And I tell you something, I think a lot of people aren't working at their desks today while they engage in all this online chat that's happening. And I definitely saw the one that Brooklyn wouldn't have met her if it wasn't for the Beckhams, because she's filthy rich and he was lucky his parents are too. But I remember when Mexit happened, we all remember recollections may vary. You remember that word that was used? And I wonder, you know, this might be the same case over Brooklyn Beckham's claims, but at the heart of it, it's a family split apart, which is still extremely sad for all the people involved. Yes, people are criticising him that he's a Nepo baby, his photography career didn't work, his cooking career didn't work, but besides all of that, that's his parents.
And it is heartbreaking, and I think that's what people are forgetting here. It's the same with Harry and King Charles and the royal family. Seeing a family split is always heartbreaking to see. And I think, you know, most people are just concentrating on the salacious nature of it. But behind closed doors, for someone for like Victoria Beckham, who loves her children, I can imagine as a mother, she must be quite upset today to know that her son has aired her out in public saying she was dancing inappropriately on him at the wedding. So such things is going to be hard to forgive and to forget. And, you know, it was only a few weeks ago we broke a story that Brooklyn said that he only wanted to have contact with his family through lawyers. How bad is that it's got to a stage that they can only communicate through lawyers now? So this is a relationship, as he says, he doesn't want to reconcile, but I think one day he will regret the words that he's put out there.
And they always say blood is thicker than water. But Stephanie, another thing that they always say is all press is good press. Even bad press is good press. And I was just wondering about this when it comes to the Beckhams, because we're saying, oh, you know, this could damage their brand, but it could actually also drive traffic to look at Victoria Beckham's clothing and makeup brand. It could spark a new interest in the Beckham's life. So maybe it won't be that bad.
We hope it won't be bad, because you know what, I've seen celebrities over the years bounce out from the most horrible of family feuds. And if we think about it, over the past 2 years, we've had 2 Netflix documentaries on Victoria Beckham and David Beckham separately, and people loved watching it. So this is a very smart couple here. They're already thinking about how do we reverse the damage control and how do we make it work in our favor. And it is going to be like, what did they do next? Already David Beckham is in Davos at the World Economic Forum. So clearly life has already moved on for him. And you know what? He gets a lot of lucrative deals. And I don't think he's about to lose that because of his son. As well, Spice Girl fans, we are waiting for this big Spice Girl reunion and hoping that Victoria Beckham joins. So hopefully she might be able to shift things by actually getting back with the Spice Girls. So, you know, all the PRs are probably getting together and thinking, how do we turn things around? And we never know. Maybe they might do a sit-down interview and address this. Like, they've been a public family for the last 25 years. And just because things have gone topsy-turvy, it doesn't mean they need to go quiet on their fans.
Stephanie Tetchy, the Spice Girls are still my favourite band. I'd love to go and see them. I always loved the Spice Girls. I must admit something. Jerry was my favourite. But thank you so much for joining me, as always.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann. Take care.
Take care, Stephanie. Thank you. And a reminder of our top stories. Donald Trump doubles down on his push to claim Greenland, threatening Europe with more tariffs. The Syrian Defense Ministry has announced a 4-day ceasefire after a new agreement with Kurdish forces. And Brooklyn Beckham accuses his parents of trying to sabotage his marriage and says he won't reconcile with them. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X, and we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.